8:42 a.m., February 9th, 1945. Paco Railroad Station, Manila. 2 American soldiers are lying behind rubble, barely 60 yards from the station. In front of them, 300 Japanese Marines, fully armed, who've turned the railroad station into a fortress. Private Cleto Rodriguez, 21 years old. Private John Reese, 21 years old. Both from Company B, 148th Infantry, 37th Infantry Division. 2 previous assaults by their company have already failed. Heavy casualties. American troops are now pinned down behind the defensive line. Machine gun fire, 20mm cannons, 37mm guns, mortars hammering from the station. Ahead lies an open field, roughly 100 yards. No cover. The last man who tried to cross it is still out there, face down in the dirt. This is an attack that any sane soldier would call suicide. But Rodriguez looks at Reese. Reese nods back. And in the next 2.5 hours, these 2 men will do something so impossible that the U.S. Army will award them both the Medal of Honor. They'll kill 82 enemy soldiers. They'll crack open a fortress that 3 companies couldn't take. And for decades, almost nobody knew their names. The question isn't whether they'll charge into 300 Japanese Marines. The question is, how did 2 American soldiers turn a suicide mission into one of the most lethal assaults in urban warfare history? And why did it take so long for anyone to hear this story? To understand why 2 21-year-old soldiers would make this decision, you need to understand what Manila had become by February 1945. The Battle of Manila was one of the bloodiest urban battles of World War II. Not Stalingrad level, but close. The Japanese weren't retreating. They were making the Americans pay for every street, every building, every room. Paco Railroad Station sat at a critical junction in the southern part of the city. Whoever controlled it controlled the route south. The Japanese knew this. They'd fortified it with everything they had: pillboxes, heavy machine guns, 20mm and 37mm anti-aircraft guns repurposed for ground defense, mortars, and roughly 300 Marines who had no intention of surrendering. The 37th Infantry Division had been fighting block by block through Manila for 6 weeks. Rodriguez's Company B had already taken heavy losses. They'd learned the hard way how the Japanese fought in cities: snipers in every window, booby traps in doorways, machine gun nests in rubble piles that looked like nothing. And now they were staring at Paco Station. 2 assaults had already gone in. Both failed. Men cut down in the open field, others pinned behind cover, unable to move forward or back. The platoon was stuck, bleeding, exhausted, and running out of options. Rodriguez had been fighting in Manila long enough to earn a reputation. They called him the Mozart of the BAR, the Browning automatic rifle. Not because he was flashy, because he was precise. He understood angles. He knew how to use a window without getting his head blown off. He knew that in urban combat, the difference between life and death was often 6 inches, left or right of a doorframe. He'd been watching the station for over an hour, studying it. There was a collapsed house about 60 yards from the main building. Close enough to matter. Close enough to hit hard targets. Gun crews, officers, the men who made the defensive system work. Nobody gave an order. Rodriguez looked at Reese. Reese was from Oklahoma. Quiet, steady. A barman like Rodriguez. They didn't need to say much. Reese nodded. They started gathering ammunition. They moved methodically, not frantically, like men who understood that panic gets you killed. Rodriguez grabbed every spare BR magazine he could find. 20 rounds per magazine. He stuffed 4 extra mags into his belt, his pockets, anywhere they'd fit. Reese did the same. Between the two of them, over 300 rounds of 30-06 ammunition. Then the grenades. 6 fragmentation grenades each. 12 total. Do the math. 2 men, over 300 rounds, 12 grenades, against 300 Japanese Marines. On paper, it's insane. But Rodriguez wasn't thinking about paper. He was thinking about geometry, about fields of fire, about the fact that a defensive position is only as strong as the men operating the weapons, and if you kill the gun crews first, the guns go silent. They checked their BARs one last time. Magazines seated, safeties off. Then they ran. 30 yards, 40, 50. The air came apart. Machine gun fire ripped across the field. Mortars started dropping. Crump, crump, crump. Dirt and shrapnel geysering up around them. The sound was so loud it stopped being sound. It became pressure, a physical force trying to crush them into the earth. Rodriguez's lungs burned. His legs felt like lead. Everything narrowed down to breathing and moving. Breathing and moving. The world reduced to the distance between him and that collapsed house. 60 yards. They dove through what used to be a doorway. Hit the floor hard. Dust everywhere. The walls were pocked with bullet holes. Half the roof had caved in. This had been someone's home. There were still broken plates on the floor, a child's shoe. Now it was a firing position. Rodriguez took the left window. Reese took the right. They stayed low, away from the center of the frames. Never shoot from the middle of a window. That's where snipers aim. Always the edge. Always the corner. Rodriguez looked out. 60 yards to the station. He could see gun positions, machine gun nests, mortar crews adjusting their tubes. He pressed the stock of the bar into his shoulder. And if you're watching this and thinking, there's no way 2 guys pulled this off, hit that subscribe button. Because what happens in the next 10 minutes is going to rewrite everything you thought you knew about impossible odds. Rodriguez took a breath and opened fire. The first burst from Rodriguez's bar was 4 rounds. Controlled, precise. A Japanese machine gun crew, 40 yards out, went silent. 3 men down in less than 2 seconds. Reese opened up on a 20mm gun position at 35 yards. The gunner slumped forward. The loader tried to take his place. Reese put him down too. This wasn't spray and pray. This was surgical. Rodriguez had learned something in 6 weeks of urban warfare. In a fortified position, everyone has a job. Machine gunners, mortar crews, officers directing fire, radio operators, ammunition runners. The system only works when all the pieces work together. Kill the pieces. The system collapses. He shifted to a mortar crew adjusting their tube. 2 shots. The crew scattered. He tracked left, an officer, probably a lieutenant, gesturing to troops behind a pillbox. 3-round burst. The officer went down. The soldiers behind him hesitated. That hesitation was fatal. Reese hit them while they were frozen. The Japanese defenders had been expecting another frontal assault. They'd been ready for Americans charging across the open field, easy to cut down with interlocking fire. They weren't ready for a firing position 60 yards out on their flank, hitting them from an angle they hadn't reinforced. Chaos is a weapon, and Rodriguez and Reese were deploying it with mathematical precision. Another machine gun nest. Down. A group of replacements trying to move up to reinforce a pillbox. Rodriguez caught them in the open. Reese followed up with a long burst. They never made it. The sound was constant now. The bar has a distinctive rhythm, slower than a machine gun, heavier. Chunk, 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 chunk. Every burst told a story. Every story ended the same way. Minutes blurred together. Target, fire, shift, target, fire, Shift. A 37-millimeter gun crew tried to pivot their weapon toward the house. Rodriguez hit the gunner, then the loader, then put rounds into the breech mechanism itself. The gun sat silent, useless. Reese was working the right side of the station. Methodical. A sniper in a second-floor window. A soldier trying to set up a Nambu machine gun on a pile of sandbags. A cluster of troops moving between positions, thinking they were in cover. They weren't. The math of war was shifting. The Japanese had started with overwhelming firepower, heavy machine guns, cannons, mortars, all coordinated, interlocking fields of fire that made the approach to the station a killing ground. But now, gun crews were dead. Officers were down. Radio communication was breaking. The mortars couldn't find the target. 2 men in a collapsed house, constantly moving, never staying in one spot. The interlocking fire wasn't interlocking anymore. There were gaps, blind spots, and Rodriguez could see them. 20 minutes in, he'd counted at least 15 confirmed kills. Reese probably the same. But it wasn't about the body count, though that number would eventually reach 82. It was about what those kills represented. Every dead machine gunner meant one less gun suppressing American troops behind them. Every dead officer meant more confusion, slower reaction times. Every destroyed gun position meant one less piece of the defensive puzzle. The fortress was cracking. But the Japanese weren't done. Not even close. Because when you hurt an enemy badly enough, they stop thinking about defense. They start thinking about killing you, specifically, no matter what it costs. And that's when things got worse. The Japanese weren't stupid. They'd figured out where the fire was coming from. And they adjusted. Every gun that could still traverse started pivoting toward the house. Machine guns, rifle fire, mortars. The walls started disintegrating, not crumbling, disintegrating, chunks of concrete and wood exploding inward with every impact. Dust so thick, Rodriguez could barely see Reese across the room. A mortar round hit the roof. Part of the ceiling collapsed between them. Debris everywhere. Rodriguez's ears were ringing so loud he couldn't hear his own weapon firing. He could only feel the recoil hammering into his shoulder. 30 seconds. That's how long it took for the house to transform from cover into a trap. Another mortar. Closer. The floor shook. Shrapnel punched through what was left of the walls. A piece of metal the size of a finger embedded itself in the doorframe inches from Rodriguez's head. They were no longer in a firing position. They were in a coffin that hadn't closed yet. Reese looked at Rodriguez through the dust. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. They both understood. Stay here. They die. The Japanese had their range now. The next mortar round, or the one after that, would land directly on top of them. But retreating wasn't an option either. Cross that open field again, under concentrated fire, with every Japanese gun now alert and aimed? That's suicide without the payoff. Rodriguez felt it then. That edge between fear and clarity. His heart was hammering. His hands were shaking from adrenaline. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get out, to put distance between himself and the incoming fire. But his mind was running different calculations. Distance. Trajectory. Dead space. And then it clicked. Mortars are indirect fire weapons. They arc, which means there's a minimum range, a distance too close for the tube angle to hit effectively. You get inside that range, mortars become useless. The problem? That range was closer to the enemy. Much closer. Rodriguez made the call that separated him from every other soldier pinned down that day. To survive, They had to move forward, not back, toward the guns, toward 300 men who now wanted them dead more than anything else in the world. He caught Reese's eye, pointed forward, toward the station. Reese's face didn't change. He just nodded, checked his magazine, grabbed his grenades, and they left the house. They didn't run. Running draws fire. They moved in short bounds, sprint, drop, cover, breathe, move again. 20 yards closer, then another 20. The distance to the station shrank. 60 yards became 40. 40 became 30. And then they were inside grenade range. 15 to 20 yards. Close enough to see faces. Close enough to hear voices shouting in Japanese. Close enough that when Rodriguez pulled the pin on his first grenade, he could see exactly where it needed to go. A pillbox. Reinforced concrete. Firing slit about 2 feet wide. A machine gun barrel poking through. He cooked the grenade, held it for 2 seconds after pulling the pin so it would detonate on impact. No time for anyone inside to throw it back. Then he threw. The grenade disappeared into the slit. 1 second. The explosion came from inside, muffled, contained. Smoke poured out of the firing slit. The machine gun went silent. Reese was already moving on the next target, a bunker, partially collapsed but still manned. He could see movement inside. Grenade. 2 seconds. Throw. The blast killed everyone in the bunker. Instantly. This was a different kind of fighting now. Not the long-range precision of the bar. This was close, personal. You threw a grenade into a confined space. You weren't just killing the enemy. You were erasing them. They moved like a 2-man breaching team. Rodriguez would suppress a position with the bar. Short bursts to keep heads down. Reese would move, throw a grenade, drop back. Then they'd switch. Reese suppressing. Rodriguez throwing. Another pillbox. Grenade through the firing port. Detonation. Another gun silent. A doorway leading into the station itself. Japanese soldiers moving behind it, trying to organize a counterattack. Rodriguez didn't wait. 2 grenades, one after the other. The doorway collapsed inward. The math was brutal, but simple. Each grenade in a confined space could kill 3 to 5 men. They had 12 grenades total. They were using them like a demolition team, not to kill individuals, but to break structures, collapse positions, eliminate entire firing points. The Japanese defensive system wasn't just weakening. It was disintegrating in real time. Guns that had been firing steadily for the last hour were now silent. Mortars had stopped. The crews were dead or scattered. The 20mm and 37mm guns, the backbone of the station's heavy firepower, had been systematically destroyed. The fortress that had held off 2 full company assaults was crumbling under the attack of 2 men. But there was a cost. Rodriguez checked his ammunition. 2 magazines left. Maybe 40 rounds. Reese was in the same situation. The grenades were gone. All 12. They'd done what they came to do. The defensive system was broken. The American troops behind them would be able to advance now. The killing field had been neutralized. But they were deep, 20 yards from the station, out of grenades, almost out of ammunition, and surrounded by 200+ Japanese soldiers who were now fully aware of exactly where they were. Rodriguez looked at Reese. Reese looked back. The decision didn't need words. They started moving back. Retreating under fire is one of the hardest things to do in combat. It goes against every instinct. You're turning your back on the enemy. You're giving up ground you paid for in blood and ammunition. You're exposing yourself. But staying was worse. Rodriguez did a quick calculation. 2 magazines, maybe 40 rounds between them, no grenades. They'd accomplished the mission. The station's defensive system was shattered. The heavy guns were silent. The coordinated fire that had pinned down their entire company was gone. If they stayed, they'd die for nothing. And Rodriguez had learned something in 6 weeks of Manila. There's a difference between bravery and stupidity. Bravery is taking calculated risks to achieve an objective. Stupidity is dying after you've already won. They were going back, but not the way they came. You don't retreat by running in a straight line. You retreat in bounds. One man moves while the other provides covering fire. Then you switch. It's called leapfrogging. It's slow. It's disciplined. And it's the only way to survive when the enemy wants you dead. Reese went first. Rodriguez stayed low, bar aimed at the station, ready to fire at anything that moved. Reese sprinted. 20 yards. Dropped behind a pile of rubble. Turned. Signaled. Rodriguez's turn. He ran. Legs pumping. Breath burning. Every second expecting the impact. The bullet that ends it. 20 yards. He hit the dirt next to a shattered wall. Reese moved again. They were making progress. 40 yards back. 60. But the Japanese had figured out what they were doing, and they weren't going to let them leave. Fire intensified. Not random. Targeted. Bullets stitching the ground behind Rodriguez as he ran. A burst that came so close he felt the air pressure change as rounds passed his head. 80 yards. Almost to friendly lines. Almost safe. And that's when the flanking squad appeared. 8 Japanese soldiers, coming from the left side. A route Rodriguez and Reese hadn't covered. They'd circled around, moving through rubble and collapsed buildings, trying to cut off the retreat. Rodriguez saw them, swung the BR around, pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The magazine was dry. He'd burned through his ammunition, providing covering fire for Reese. No rounds left. No grenades. Nothing. The Japanese squad was less than 30 yards away and closing fast. Reese saw it. He understood immediately. Rodriguez was exposed. Unarmed. The enemy was coming. Reese turned back. Didn't hesitate. Opened fire on the flanking squad. His bar roared. The lead Japanese soldiers went down. The others scattered, looking for cover. But they kept coming. Trained Marines, not easily deterred. Rodriguez was running now. No covering fire, no suppression, just running. Trying to get back to the American lines before the squad closed the distance. Reese kept firing, burst after burst, keeping them pinned, buying Rodriguez time. And then Reese's bar went silent too. Not because he'd stopped shooting, because he was out of ammunition. He dropped the empty magazine, reached for a fresh one. His last one. The flanking squad saw their chance. They rushed forward. Reese got the magazine seated, pulled the charging handle, brought the weapon up, and that's when the bullet hit him. Rodriguez was 30 yards away. He heard the shot, heard Reese grunt, saw him stagger. Reese didn't go down. Not immediately. He stayed on his feet, kept the bar raised, fired one more burst into the advancing Japanese soldiers, dropped 2 more. Then his legs gave out. He fell to his knees, still trying to bring the weapon up, still trying to cover Rodriguez's retreat. Another shot. Reese went down completely. Rodriguez stopped running. Every fiber of his being wanted to go back, to pull Reese out, to carry him, to not leave him there. But he was completely out of ammunition. The flanking squad was still there, 6 men, now focused entirely on him. 30 yards of open ground between him and Reese. No cover, no suppression, no fire support. The math was brutal and clear. If he went back, they both died. Reese's body, Rodriguez's body, side by side in the dirt, and it wouldn't change anything. Or Rodriguez could run, could make it to friendly lines, could live with the weight of that choice for the rest of his life. He ran. Behind him, the firing stopped. The Japanese soldiers had what they wanted. They weren't pursuing anymore. Rodriguez hit the American defensive line, stumbled over the rubble, and collapsed, completely drained. Physically, emotionally. He couldn't speak, couldn't stand. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't hold anything. Someone was asking him questions. "Where's Reese? What happened? How many did you kill?" He couldn't answer. Not yet. But behind him, across that blood-soaked open field, the firing from Paco Station had changed. It wasn't the coordinated, devastating barrage from before. It was sporadic, disorganized, desperate. The fortress was broken. 10 minutes later, Company B went forward again. This time, there was no wall of fire. No coordinated machine gun barrages. No mortars dropping in precise patterns. No 20mm or 37mm guns tearing apart the approach. The American troops crossed the same field that had been a killing ground just hours before. They expected to get cut down. They'd seen it happen twice already that morning. But the fire that met them was scattered, uncoordinated. Rifles and a few remaining light machine guns. Deadly, but not the coordinated system that had stopped them before. The heavy weapons were silent. The gun crews were dead. It took less than 10 minutes to overrun Paco Station. Not because the Japanese had given up. They fought hard, room to room, until almost none were left. But because the spine of their defense had been broken. The pillboxes were destroyed. The heavy guns were wrecked. The officers who coordinated fire were dead. The ammunition runners who kept the system supplied were gone. Rodriguez and Reese had done that. 2 men, 2.5 hours, 60 yards of ground. When the station was finally secured, the soldiers who entered saw what was left. Gun positions torn apart by grenades, bodies slumped over weapons that would never fire again. A 20mm cannon with its breech mechanism destroyed, surrounded by spent BR casings, blood on the walls, ammunition scattered across the floor. One soldier later said it looked like a tornado had gone through, but a tornado that only hit the guns and the men operating them. Someone did a count. They walked the positions Rodriguez and Reese had hit, counted bodies, counted destroyed gun emplacements, tried to piece together what had actually happened. 82 confirmed enemy killed, directly attributable to the 2-man assault. More than 40 from rifle fire. The methodical, surgical shooting from that first position 60 yards out. More than 30 from grenades, the close-quarters demolition work that collapsed pillboxes and bunkers. The rest from combined fire and the chaos that followed. 82 men, out of roughly 300 defending the station. More than a quarter of the entire garrison eliminated by 2 soldiers in 150 minutes. The numbers almost didn't make sense. Command questioned them at first. It sounded like propaganda. Like the kind of story you tell to boost morale, not the kind of thing that actually happens. But the evidence was there. The destroyed positions, the bodies, the testimony of other soldiers who'd watched it happen, the fact that the station, which had held off 2 company-level assaults, fell in minutes after Rodriguez and Reese broke its defensive system. This wasn't fiction. This was math. Brutal, undeniable math. 2 men with BARs and grenades had done what 200 men couldn't do in frontal assault, not because they were superhuman, but because they understood how defensive systems work and systematically dismantled them from an unexpected angle. In the history of urban warfare in World War II, there are very few examples of a 2-man assault achieving this kind of tactical effect against a fortified position held by superior numbers. Most historians compare it to some of the legendary small unit actions in Stalingrad or during the fall of Berlin. But those stories are famous, movies have been made, books written, monuments built. Rodriguez and Reese? Most people have never heard of them. But the U.S. Army had heard. And 3 months later, both men would be awarded the Medal of Honor. Rodriguez in person, Reese posthumously. The citation would read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty." But citations don't capture what it costs. Rodriguez had made it back, but he hadn't really come back. Not yet. For 3 days after Paco Station, Rodriguez didn't eat. Not really. He'd sit with his rations and stare at them. Someone would tell him to eat. He'd take a bite, chew mechanically, swallow. But he wasn't tasting anything. He didn't sleep either. Not the way sleep is supposed to work. He'd close his eyes and see Reese going down, see himself running, see that 30 yards of open ground, hear the click of an empty magazine, feel the choice again, and again, and again. Other soldiers tried to talk to him, clapped him on the back, said things like, "You did what you had to do," and "Reese knew what he was signing up for," and "You're a hero, man." Rodriguez didn't respond. He'd just nod. Or not nod. His eyes were somewhere else. This is what people don't talk about when they talk about Medal of Honor recipients. They talk about the action, the bravery, the impossible odds. They don't talk about the 3 days after, when a 21-year-old kid can't eat or sleep because he's replaying the moment he left his friend to die. Even if it was the right call, even if going back would have killed them both. The math doesn't make it easier. On the 3rd day, Rodriguez's company got orders. Another target, the Philippine legislature building. Another fortress. Another Japanese strongpoint. Another impossible assault. Someone asked Rodriguez if he was ready. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just picked up his BR, checked the action, loaded a fresh magazine, and he went. The legislative building assault was different. Rodriguez had learned from Paco. He knew now that you could break a fortress if you hit it from the right angle, at the right range, with the right tactics. This time, he wasn't alone. This time, he had a fire team with him. But the approach was the same. Get close, eliminate the heavy weapons, create chaos in the defensive system, open the door for the main assault. He moved through the building like a machine, methodical, precise, room to room, a 20mm gun emplacement blocking the advance. He destroyed it. 6 Japanese soldiers holding a critical corridor. He killed them all. No hesitation. No wasted movement. Just execution. When it was over, the Army awarded him the Silver Star for the legislative building, added it to the Medal of Honor they were already processing for Paco Station. 2 of the highest awards the U.S. military can give. 3 days apart. But Rodriguez didn't feel like a hero. Heroes save people. Rodriguez had watched Reese die and kept running. That's the weight. That's what doesn't make it into the citations or the history books or the medal ceremonies. October 12th, 1945. The White House lawn. President Harry Truman pinned the Medal of Honor on Technical Sergeant Cleto Rodriguez's chest. Photographers snapped pictures. Officials shook his hand. Someone read the citation aloud. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty. Rodriguez stood at attention, face blank, eyes forward. Somewhere in Oklahoma, John Reese's family was receiving his Medal of Honor, posthumously. The word the Army uses when you earn the medal but don't live to wear it. Rodriguez thought about that a lot. Posthumously. After death. The word that separates the living from the dead, the survivors from the heroes. He was 21 years old, and he'd carry Paco Station for the rest of his life. Cleto Rodriguez came home to San Antonio, Texas in December 1945. There was a parade, a key to the city. Newspaper articles calling him a hero. People wanted to shake his hand, hear the story, see the medal. He smiled for the photographers, said the right things, thanked everyone for their support. And then he went quiet. He married Flora Muniz on November 11th, 1945, Veterans Day. They had 4 children, Cleto Jr., Betty, Mary and Taman, and Joe. He worked for the Veterans Administration, helping other soldiers navigate benefits, education, reintegration. He used the GI Bill to get an education, learned skills, built a life that looked from the outside like success. But he never talked about Paco Station. Not to his wife, not to his children, not to friends who asked. When people asked about the Medal of Honor, he'd give short answers. Factual. Emotionless. I did my job. A lot of men did more. He'd change the subject. Because how do you explain Paco Station to someone who wasn't there? How do you explain what it feels like to leave your friend dying in the dirt because the math said you had to? How do you explain that the Medal of Honor around your neck feels like it weighs more than any boar you ever carried? You don't. So Rodriguez didn't. In 1952, he rejoined the service. This time, the Air Force. 2 years later, he was back in the Army. He served in Korea. He served in Vietnam. He retired in 1970 as a master sergeant. 26 years of service across 3 wars. Some men leave the military and never look back. Rodriguez kept going back. Maybe because it was the only place where he didn't have to explain. Where the other men understood without asking. Where the weight was shared. In 1975, the elementary school he'd attended as a boy in San Antonio was renamed Cleto Rodriguez Elementary School. The only school in the San Antonio School District named after a former student. Most of the kids who went there didn't know who he was, just a name on a sign. In 1991, a section of U.S. Route 90 in San Antonio, 8.5 miles from Interstate 410 to Interstate 35, was designated the Cleto Rodriguez Freeway. Thousands of people drive it every day. Most don't know why it's called that. There's a rifle range at Camp Perry, Ohio, named after him. The National Rifle and Pistol Championships are held there. Shooters from all over the country compete on a range named for a man who once fired a bar with surgical precision for 2.5 hours straight. Most of them don't know the story. Rodriguez lived quietly, worked, raised his family, helped other veterans, attended some ceremonies when asked, but he never sought attention, never wrote a book, never consulted on a movie, never did the talk show circuit. One of his grandchildren became a comedian and TV personality in San Antonio. Sometimes people would make the connection, wait, are you related to the Cleto Rodriguez? And even then, most people didn't know what that meant. Cleto Rodriguez died on December 7th, 1990, Pearl Harbor Day. He was 67 years old. He's buried at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery in San Antonio. Section A, A simple headstone. His name, his rank, his medals: Medal of Honor, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. The stones around him belong to other veterans, other wars, other stories that most people will never hear. John Reese is buried at Fort Gibson National Cemetery in Oklahoma. He was 21 when he died. Never married. No children. His Medal of Honor citation is inscribed on his headstone. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Two men. One survived 50 years. One survived 2.5 hours. Both earned the same medal. Both paid a price most people will never understand. And both were almost completely forgotten. The Battle of Manila lasted from February 3rd to March 3rd, 1945. 1 month of urban warfare that turned one of Asia's most beautiful cities into a graveyard. When it was over, the numbers were almost incomprehensible. 100,000 Filipino civilians dead, caught between two armies fighting street by street, building by building, killed by artillery, by crossfire, by deliberate massacres, by starvation and disease in a city that had become a battlefield. 16,000 Japanese soldiers dead. Most fought to the last man, following orders to defend Manila to the death, turning it into a fortress that had to be taken room by room. 1,000 American soldiers dead. Thousands more wounded. Young men from Ohio and Texas and California and Oklahoma fighting an enemy that refused to surrender in a city they were trying to liberate. 90% of Manila was destroyed. Only Warsaw suffered worse destruction in World War II. Churches that had stood for 300 years, rubble. Universities, rubble. Hospitals, rubble. Homes where families had lived for generations, gone. Paco Railroad Station still stands today. The building survived. You can still see it if you go to Manila. The walls are pocked with bullet holes, scars from grenades, damage from the battle that never got fully repaired. For years, there were plans to turn it into a shopping center. They tore down parts of it, started construction, then stopped, abandoned it. The station sat there, half demolished, slowly decaying. Recently, there's been talk of restoring it as a historical site, preserving what's left, turning it into a memorial. Most people who pass by don't know what happened there on February 9th, 1945. They don't know about Rodriguez and Reese. They don't know about the 82 men who died in 2.5 hours. They don't know that two 21-year-old soldiers with BARs and grenades broke a fortress that hundreds couldn't take. History has a way of forgetting, especially the small stories. The individual acts of courage that don't fit into the big narrative of divisions and campaigns and grand strategy. But those small stories matter, because they're the real stories. They're what actually happened on the ground, in the dirt, in the blood and smoke and terror of combat. 2 American soldiers versus 300 Japanese sounds like a movie, like fiction, like something someone made up to sell tickets or write a thriller novel. But it happened. It's documented. The Medal of Honor citations, the after-action reports, the testimony of the soldiers who were there, the bodies that were counted, the gun positions that were destroyed. It happened in 2.5 hours at a railroad station in Manila, and it cost John Reese his life at 21 years old. And it cost Cleto Rodriguez 50 years of carrying that weight. That's the price of legends, the real ones, not the Hollywood ones where everyone lives, and the music swells and the hero rides off into the sunset. The real ones end with a young man face down in the dirt, and another young man living the rest of his life knowing he had to leave him there. The real ones end with names on schools and freeways that nobody recognizes. The real ones end with gravestones in quiet cemeteries that most people will never visit. But they still matter. Because Rodriguez and Reese did something that day that changed the course of a battle. That saved the lives of the men in their company who would have died trying to take that station the hard way. That demonstrated what's possible when training, courage, tactical thinking, and sheer determination come together in two soldiers who refused to accept that the mission was impossible. They didn't do it for glory. They didn't do it for recognition. They did it because their platoon was pinned down and dying, and someone had to do something. And when it was over, one of them was dead, and the other wished he was. That's war. Not the version you see in movies. The real version. And if this story matters, if it's worth remembering, it's not because of the body count or the tactical brilliance or even the Medal of Honor. It's because Cleto Rodriguez and John Reese were real. They lived. They fought. One died. One survived and carried the weight until he couldn't carry it anymore. Their names deserve to be remembered, not as heroes, not as legends, but as men who did an impossible thing and paid a price for it that most of us will never understand. Paco Railroad Station, February 9th, 1945. 8:42 a.m. 2 men, 300 enemies, 2.5 hours. That's not a legend. That's history. And history should never be forgotten.